Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Coronado Conspiracy, a Rick Holden novel. By George Galdorisi, narrated by Joel Richards. Chapter 1. Coronado's bow rose, hesitated, then crashed back into the sea, sending green water rushing along her forecastle, then running back in 1,000 rivulets out through the scuppers and back into the roiling ocean. The 18,000-ton Landing Platform Dock, or LPD, flagship for Joint Task Force 8, pounded rhythmically through the eastern Pacific, west of Panama, rising and falling in sync with the cadence of the sea, her massive bulk shuddering with each rise and fall. Coronado wasn't a sleek-looking greyhound. She was a workhorse, a blue-collar ship, as many of her crew fondly described her. Her bulk, and particularly her broad beam, seemed to crush the waves beneath her, rather than slice through them, as her agile, small combatant brethren did. On the bridge, high above the surface of the sea, it was business as usual on the 2000 to 2400 watch. The faint glow of the radar repeaters and the green digital readouts of the global positioning system at the navigator's chart table provided the only illumination in an otherwise dark setting. With no moon and few stars, there was no line between sea and sky, just the seamless, murky background the sailors on the bridge had dubbed the inside of the inkwell. The faint background static of a half-dozen radios tuned to receive incoming transmissions on the circuits guarded by Coronado, provided a constant drone of white noise. When combined with the measured cadence of the ship's rise and fall, it all threatened to lull the watchstanders to sleep, or at least into a sense of lethargy not uncommon on a watch like this. The conning officer, Ensign Mike Powers, was being drawn into that stupor, but was broken out of it abruptly by the commanding voice of the officer of the deck, Lieutenant Bill Miller. "Powers, has Radio Central transmitted our evening sit-rep yet?" "I'll check again," Powers replied. He pressed the button to Radio Central on the bitch box, Navy slang for the ship's intercom, one of the last remaining pieces of original equipment on this 40-year-old flagship and former amphibious ship, now configured with the most up-to-date communications and intelligence gear in the military inventory. The response from the watch supervisor, Radioman First Class Frank Rodriguez, was the same one that Powers had heard throughout the course of his watch. "No, sir. Volume of traffic to and from the staff has been heavy, mostly op immediate and flash. Sit-rep is in the queue, but it'll probably be a while." Miller didn't like what he heard. The captain's night orders, his instructions to his watch team, to be followed to the letter while he slept, were insistent. The sit-rep goes out on time, unless Coronado wants a loud, undesired blast from the squadron commander in Norfolk. The sit-rep, the Navy's shorthand for situation report, was a daily, ponderous collection of minutiae sent back to the ship's administrative commander. It contained everything from how much fuel they had burned in the last 24 hours, to what spare parts they needed from the supply system, to how many of Coronado's 400-plus sailors had needed treatment at sickbay that day. If the embarked Joint Task Force 8 staff was, for some unknown reason, sending a high volume of op immediate and flash traffic, code words for the highest priority messages, which bumped all normal traffic, his sit-rep would just have to wait. Miller considered jumping in and responding directly to Rodriguez, but thought better of it. He allowed Powers to reply to Radio Central with a simple, "Bridge aye." Miller was a seasoned officer and had been attached to the flagship long enough to know that something way out of the ordinary was going on. True, the 100-plus man JTF-8 staff generated and received a large amount of message traffic, but most of it was routine, just as their mission had been for the past 2 months. Joint Task Force 8, commanded by Army Brigadier General Ashley Lovelace, was the Pentagon's anti-drug task force. It was charged with drawing together the resources of all services within the Department of Defense, as well as those of federal anti-drug agencies. Their embarkation aboard Coronado allowed them to get close to the action, the littoral waters off of Central and South America, where the flow of drugs into the United States by air and sea were still at epidemic proportions. The current administration had made stopping the flow of drugs into the United States a top priority, and Brigadier General Lovelace, because he had been chosen over others with more seniority, was rumored to have been the President's personal pick for this high-visibility assignment. The volume of message traffic to and from the JTF-8 staff, coupled with a notable decrease in the presence of staff officers at normal functions, ranging from meals to movies to daily workouts, all suggested to Miller that a big operation was in the offing. Curiously, the JTF-8 staff had been circumspect about discussing their activities with ship's company officers, and the usual amiable banter in the wardroom had been replaced by stony silence and a rush to get back to their staff spaces. Miller surveyed the sea with his 7x50 BIF SX U.S. Navy regulation binoculars. The damn things felt like a brick around his neck, thinking of his family thousands of miles away, when the bitch box squawked again. "Bridge, Staff Watch Officer." "Bridge, aye," Miller responded, moving the junior powers aside so that he, as the more senior officer, could deal directly with the watch officer of the embarked JTF-8 staff. "Staff Navigation wants you to come easterly to a course of 120 true." "We've got a much easier ride here at 030, countered Miller. "The ship will be abeam the swells at 120. Miller, knowing junior staff watch officers, often came up with orders for the ship that reflected their own whims, and not the desires of their leaders, wanted to let the majority of Coronado's sailors spend most of the night restfully, not having to wedge themselves into their racks as the ship rolled incessantly from side to side in the long, deep Pacific swells. "Roger that," replied the watch officer. "We've worked this out down here. Just make it so." Miller tried again. "Okay, but maybe if we just come about halfway," but immediately regretted it, as the unmistakable gruff voice of the JTF-8 Chief of Staff, Colonel Conrad Hicks, boomed over the now resonating bitch box. "Lieutenant, if you can't execute the order, I'll have your captain relieve you with someone who can." Miller was stunned by the ferocity of the command. "Right, full rudder, steer course 120, Powers said, trying to help the shaken Miller recover his composure by at least responding to Hicks's order with alacrity. "Helmsman, aye, right full rudder, make my course 120, the shaken sailor replied. "Aye, aye, Colonel, coming right to course 120 now. I'll inform the captain," Miller said, as all the bridge watchstanders became a little more aware that the JTF-8 staff, indeed, had plans for Coronado and her crew. As her sleeping sailors braced themselves reflexively against the ship's rolls, Coronado shuddered as full rudder brought her around toward a new course. 8 decks below the bridge, in Coronado's weight room, dozens of barbells rocked in their racks with the ship's new movement, and the men lifting weights tried to keep their balance. This interruption was an occupational hazard of weightlifting aboard a moving ship, but pumping iron was one of the only ways of getting a workout aboard Coronado, other than running in endless circles around the ship's small flight deck during those sporadic times when helicopter flight operations weren't in progress. Coronado's weight room bore absolutely no resemblance to glitzy gyms ashore. Crammed into a corner of lower vehicle stow, the usual location for amphibious vehicles in years past when Coronado had been a straight-stick amphibious ship, this relatively inaccessible part of the ship lived in musty negligence, with poor ventilation, Low-hanging overheads, dirty bulkheads, missing lights, and a general veneer of grit so common aboard most steam-powered ships past a quarter-century in age. Consequently, only a hardy few, those most dedicated fitness fanatics, frequented this murky place. Chief Petty Officer Rick Holden was one of them. He was a special weapons and communications expert with the embarked Navy SEAL team, and physical fitness for Holden wasn't just a hobby. It was an occupational necessity. In fact, he was such a regular in the weight room that the few ship's company and more numerous staff officers who frequented it carried on an easy banter with the chief, an enlisted man with whom they would have normally dealt far more formally if they'd encountered him several decks above. "Hey, Holden, you SEALs really have a racket. The Navy actually pays you good money to keep all buff and cut," needled Commander Ben Malgrave. Malgrave, the staff communications officer, and another weight-room regular, rarely missed an opportunity to give Holden a hard time about being in a line of work where he was paid to do what he enjoyed anyway. "That's right, Commo," Holden replied, "and all I'm trying to do is give the Navy their money's worth." One needed only to glance at Holden to see that he was right. Even among a group of SEALs, who were known for their high level of fitness, Chief Rick Holden stood out. A full 6 feet 2 inches tall and a finely muscled 180 pounds, Holden should have been on a Navy recruiting poster. "Way those young lieutenants are driving this ship, lucky we get a workout at all," groused Malgrave. "All this rock and roll got you skipping workouts, or are you just getting lazy, Commander?" Holden chided. "Just been too busy. Radio traffic has been hot and heavy. And you know who's the point man on that," Malgrave replied, straining for just one more 220-pound bench press. "The powers that be must be bored. I guess they figure they've got to help us operators by checking up on us and having us tell them everything we're doing every minute of the day." "No, this is different. Mostly P4s going back and forth between General Lovelace and either Southern Command or the Joint Chiefs in the Pentagon. You know how high-vis this anti-drug stuff is, and you know how my general's got a notion he can stop the flow all by his lonesome. Some of the traffic has gone spec-cat, so even yours truly hasn't seen it." His communications knowledge alerted Holden to the fact Coronado's hitherto routine anti-drug deployment had reached a different level. P4s were personal 4 messages exchanged between flag and general officers that allowed them to communicate directly in plain language, unencumbered by the bureaucratic structure and jargon of most military messages. Spec-cats, or special category messages, were those of such a highly sensitive nature that only a specially designated senior radio man and the person to whom the message was addressed were allowed to view them. Holden could sense that Malgrave was more than a little annoyed at being out of the loop. "You mean more than one spec-cat?" Holden asked. "More in a few days than I've seen on a full deployment," Malgrave responded. "Can't believe that this anti-drug mission has that much interest. We haven't done a significant op in a month and a half." "True, but I can feel the momentum building. Staff's been having a lot of meetings, just the heavies. General, Chief of Staff, and a few others. Not the minions like this LDO." As an LDO, or limited-duty officer, Malgrave had worked his way up through the ranks, starting out as an enlisted radio man, then becoming an officer and rising through the ranks in his technical specialty. LDOs were vital to the operations of any staff, but weren't typically in the inner circle and certainly not privy to important decision-making processes. Malgrave had initially been surprised that a SEAL, one of those folk primarily concerned with killing people and breaking things, would know so much about all of this complex communications gear and be conversant with Navy communications circuits and procedures. But as the leading communicator for his SEAL team, Holden was in Radio Central frequently and was eager to help, and, damn the Navy drawdown, Malgrave was so short-handed that he welcomed the extra assistance repairing gear, setting up circuits and the like. Conveniently, Holden had all of the proper compartmentalized security clearances needed to work on and operate some of Malgrave's most sophisticated gear. All this kept Holden in good stead with the staff commo. "Well, commo, I guess they'll let us know when they let us know." "That's the Navy way. Probably just a routine operation someone's trying to make seem more important to give everyone a sense that we're doing something that matters." But Holden suspected it was more than just routine. He remembered feeling this way before he had suffered a fateful setback in his previous life, only to resurface as a Navy SEAL, a role he had played well since being assigned to Coronado. As was their habit after a workout, Holden and Malgrave climbed the 8 decks of ladders from Coronado's gym to Radio Central to check on the action prior to returning to their respective homes. Holden to the 3-tier Chief's berthing compartment, or goat locker in Navy parlance, Malgrave to his small but personalized commander's stateroom. "Come on, Commander. Way you were pumping iron down below, you should be sprinting up these steps," Holden said. "Just wait until you get a few more years on you, Holden. Seagoing life takes its toll. I've probably got more years at sea than you have in the Navy," Malgrave replied. Holden thought how true that was. He was about to change the subject as they rounded a corner and started down the athwartship's passageway outside of Radio Central, but they were interrupted before he got the chance. Colonel Conrad Hicks sprang from radio in his starched Army uniform and his Chief of Staff loop. Hicks barely looked at them as he snarled, "Make a hole," and breezed past them. As Malgrave and Holden ducked into radio to see what the commotion was all about, Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez and the rest of his watch team looked as perplexed as Holden and Malgrave did. Chapter 2. General Charles Bigelow Walters sat at his large desk in his imposing office at his headquarters building. As head of the U.S. Southern Command, SOUTHCOM, he was one of the military's top leaders, a unified command commander, with broad powers over all he surveyed. On paper, Walters was responsible for U.S. military activities in South America, as well as in Central America south of Mexico. This was an area of responsibility encompassing 19 countries, representing about 1/6 of the world's landmass, covering about 7 million square miles, and stretching 6,000 miles from the Mexican-Guatemalan border to the southern tip of South America. In his own mind, he was responsible for a great deal more. It was a responsibility that would give most men pause. But Walters wasn't like most men, and he took it all in stride. Tall, trim, and tan, General Walters appeared the perfect warrior. His athletic build belied his 57 years, and he looked more ready to take on the world than did men half his age. His 6-foot 3-inch frame and hardened 190-pound body, his square jaw, his penetrating blue eyes, all conveyed a sense of overwhelming power, unsurpassed confidence, and the absolute ability to get things done when, where, and how he wanted them done. It was a look he had refined during his many years in the Army. He thought about the unlikely sequence of events leading up to this moment, the election, the long-anticipated and long-feared changes, the meeting, his surprise appointment as SOUTHCOM commander, and the sudden selection of Brigadier General Lovelace to command Operation Roundup. It was all unfolding as planned, and not a moment too soon. The nation, his nation, the one he had sworn to defend and that he had defended for the past 34 years, was in mortal danger. Only he could save it now. One would have to know Charles Bigelow Walters only casually to understand how he could believe he held the fate of the nation in his hands. born into a prominent banking family, and educated at Phillips Exeter Academy. As the third son of an overbearing father, he had refused to become the fourth most prominent banker in the family, and had elected instead to attend the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. Once there, he'd risen to the rank of Deputy Brigade Commander of the Corps of Cadets, become an All-American squash player, and earned a Rhodes Scholarship. After graduation, his career had taken off like a rocket, and he had remained a fast-tracker ever since. Serving in Europe, Grenada, Desert Storm, Operation Iraqi Freedom, and Operation Enduring Freedom, he had always been in the field at the right place and at the right time. But the field was not where Walters had made his mark. Certainly he had distinguished himself there, but his field assignments had always been brief and seemed to end just as the exciting action did. It was inside the Washington Beltway where Walters had made a name for himself. While other officers toiled in obscure offices in the bowels of the Pentagon, where they were intimately involved in the intricacies of some Army program or some budgetary battle, Walters had always secured the most coveted high-visibility assignments: National Security Council, Office of Legislative Affairs, military aide to the Vice President, executive assistant to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. These assignments and others had assured him of early recognition as an up-and-comer. Just as importantly, these important postings had enabled him to build a network of contacts in Washington that assured him access to information few possessed. He was accustomed to getting things done and comfortable being at the nexus of critical decision-making. As he rose in seniority, the chances of him being out of the loop on any major decision involving the national security of the United States grew more and more remote. He was certainly in the loop now, inextricably bound up with his long-time associate, General Howard Campbell. Walters would give the order. The field commander would begin his operation. Things would begin to go awry. His orders to withdraw would not, could not be obeyed, and all the rest would fall into place. But he would give the order. It was to be a historic moment, his historic moment. He could rationalize the matter, Walters once thought. He was not directly involved. There would be no smoking gun, no direct link back to him and the other co-conspirators, particularly not to General Campbell. The phone had rung early in General Walters's Southcom quarters that day. He was accustomed to that. In fact, he insisted on it. His key subordinates knew that failure to wake the general on important matters would, at a minimum, evoke the severest possible public dressing down at the morning staff meeting. If the failure to alert him involved a matter that he considered vital, he was famous for the unpleasant chain of career-ending events he could set in motion against the offending officer or non-com. The hum of the air conditioning had made it difficult to hear General Campbell on the other end of the line, but the cool air was preferable to the hot, steamy Miami nights. Anyway, he knew what the call would be about, and even at 0400, his agile mind was racing with the possibilities. The only words that he needed to hear from his friend and confidant were President and go. Walters would dutifully pass the order down the chain of command, and General Lovelace would begin the operation. What would inevitably happen to Lovelace was of no concern to him. There were larger issues at stake. This was the opportunity they had waited for. He was about to set Operation Roundup in motion. As he tossed away the covers and bounded out of bed, he wondered how long it would take to ruin the commander-in-chief who had made such a shallow mockery of his and his fellow officers' careers, and of what they had once hoped they could be. Chapter 3. 2 months prior to Operation Roundup. "There, hit it," his partner said. With that, Detective Fred Callis of the Washington, D.C. Police Department gunned the unmarked 2013 Ford Police Interceptor away from the curb on New York Avenue, just east of Mount Vernon Square. He and his partner, Detective Mike Winecoop, began pursuing a beat-up, bright yellow Dodge Charger that had just wheeled out of Kim's auto body shop. Winecoop called it in to the precinct. "Base, Unit 6, we finally waited out Cooper. He's heading east on New York Avenue. We've just passed the corner of New Jersey Avenue. We're in loose trail behind him. Tell us what you want us to do." The narcotics detectives had been staked out for several days, trying to locate Harvey Penny Cooper, a mid-level drug dealer of some notoriety in the district, who was wanted for questioning in a major case they were working. Now they needed to know if their bosses wanted them to pick him up or just follow him. Awaiting a response, they passed North Capitol Street and entered the northeast section of the district. Cooper continued to speed along, past 2- and 3-story row houses, a number of which had a wide variety of chain-link fences and humble little gardens. Many of these houses were now boarded up, their former occupants driven from this once prestigious neighborhood by the blight, by the crime, and by the drugs pushed by people like Cooper. As the detectives noted the New York Avenue car wash disappearing behind them, the radio came alive. The directive from the higher-ups didn't satisfy either of them. "Unit 6, base. Stay close but try to remain unseen. However, don't lose him. We've got questions he's got to answer." "Great," Callis snarled. "That's a bureaucratic answer for you. Damned if we do and damned if we don't." "Yeah," Winecoop responded. "Maybe if those station house drones would go out on a real operation once in a while, they wouldn't be sitting there in their easy chairs dishing out half-assed instructions." Both detectives were venting their frustrations in this most thankless of jobs. Washington, D.C., had the dubious distinction of being one of the top murder cities in the United States. Callis and Winecoop both knew this epidemic was primarily due to the brisk drug trade in the city. But while the murder rate received national and even international attention, the anti-drug efforts received at best lip service and almost laughable funding. They were doing the best they could, but sometimes it seemed almost hopeless. "Guess we better close it up a bit," Winecoop said, and with that Callis moved into the passing lane on this wide avenue and cut down the distance between their Ford and Cooper's Charger. Cooper slowed down, and Callis responded in kind before the drug dealer suddenly hung a right on 1st Street Northeast and screamed south toward the heart of the Capital District. "This doesn't look good," Winecoop groused. "I know," Callis replied, "but we got to stay with him. Maybe he hasn't seen us yet." He had. They saw Cooper swivel his head and look back toward their car. Then he hit the accelerator. "That's it," Callis shouted as he hit the gas. "Light him up, Mike." Winecoop quickly took the red light from under his seat, activated it, and placed it on the roof of the Ford. Seeing the light behind him, Cooper accelerated and continued to burn south on 1st Street, past empty lots surrounded by chain-link fences, topped by barbed wire. The streets were littered everywhere with trash, boxes, used tires, and old newspapers. He continued past a 6-story warehouse on the left, crossed L Street, and swerved to avoid hitting people crossing the street in front of the Greyhound terminal. The startled pedestrians jumped back to the curb, just as Callis went screaming past them, hot on Cooper's tail. Approaching K Street, Cooper whipped his Charger into a right-hand turn. Tires screeching, he sped up, heading west along K Street. Callis closed, but Cooper braked and wheeled his car right again, onto North Capitol Street. Accelerating, he sped past Kaiser Permanente, North Capitol Medical Center, the Mount Airy Baptist Church, and the D.C. Housing Authority headquarters. Every time Callis closed the distance a bit, Cooper accelerated even more. "Damn, I hate this," Callis said. "This shit thinks he can outrun us. I hate this part. I just hate it." Winecoop hated it too and called it in. "Base Unit 6 in pursuit of a yellow Dodge Charger, traveling at high speed north on North Capitol Street. We're in pursuit. How about some backup?
Sample complete. Ready to continue?